Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about how to tip an edge on sheet metal when you don't have a bead roller. Do you even know what I'm talking about? Well, why don't you stick around and you can find out. Let's watch the show intro and I'll see you in about 30 seconds. I'm Mike and this is My Car Shop.
Working out of a 100-year-old refurbished barn, bringing 35 years of experience to projects considered beyond repair. Vision, creativity, and problem solving are essential tools in this place. Watch as we transform junk into polished metal miracles. This is My Car's Shop.
That wasn't so painful now, was it? And you've got a good overview of a lot of the projects that we're working on here. We're going to do another episode today in our series on Fabrication That Doesn't Suck. And many times I get questions about how to do things, specifically when you don't have tools and equipment like a sheet metal brake or a bead roller or a shrinker stretcher. And so today I thought I would talk a little bit about how to tip an edge. Now, if you want to know what tipping an edge is, there's an episode here on the channel where Becky and I are building the frame rails and tipping the edge of the sheet metal, which basically means we're taking a curved piece of metal or a straight piece of metal and tipping that edge so that we have a nice flange. And that requires tipping dies on the bead roller as well as shrinker stretcher. But people want to know, is there another way to do these things? And first of all, I'm going to say to tackle a project as big as making frame rails, you're not going to want to do that without having those few $100s worth of equipment. But for small pieces, for example, if we wanted to make a small little patch for a wheel well, we don't necessarily have to have those tools to do that, and we don't need to pie slice to make it happen either. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm over here on the Stitches Challenger right now, and we're looking at a wheel opening that is completely gone. And we could make that whole wheel opening with the bead roller and the shrinker stretcher. But let's just say we needed to replace just a small piece right in here. Now we've got compound. English is my favorite language. We have compound curves here. We're going to not deal with that right now, but let's just say that we needed to make a small piece to put a patch in here because this particular spot was rusted out. That's what we're going to talk about today. So we have a few tools and pieces of equipment here that we're going to be using to tip an edge on this pretend piece of 18 gauge steel that we're going to be using. We're going to need a couple pieces of wood, so we'll cut that off, and then, well, we'll just show you what we're going to do here. I'm just using a piece of pine that's probably going to work okay. Hardwood would be better, but this is a one-time thing that I'm doing. But I did want to mention that one of the things you'll discover is as you build some of these little dies, forming dies that we're going to be making, is you can just pigeon them whole away on a shelf and save them for future projects. So I've got my piece of metal that I'm going to be working with here, and I'm going to cut this off about that big, and then I'll use this to make another piece because we're making a sandwich die. Unfortunately, we do not have cordless power, so we do have to plug this in. And I don't know why this always happens to be. My little prongs always seem to end up bent. It's rather annoying. And yes, I'm using a saber saw. You can use any particular saw you want for this part, but you're going to need a saber saw for the next part. And I'm not trying to make this perfect. So we'll put that away for another project another time. So we've got our, what I'm going to call our sandwich dies here. Now the next trick is we're going to want to trace our curve onto the wood. And I'm going to try to leave as much of the die as possible, and I'll explain that in a minute. So we'll just trace our curve here. We'll just clamp these together onto the edge of our bench and take our saber saw and cut those so both pieces match. That's important because remember, we're making a forming die out of wood. And I can't emphasize enough how much I would say try to, as much as possible, make this out of hardwood rather than softwood if you plan on using it more than once. Not perfect by any means, but close enough. We'll go same thing the other way now. Not perfect, but close. I'll probably take a little sandpaper here and we'll just round this off just to make it a little bit more smooth, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So you can see now we've got a couple of nice little pine forming dies that we can take over to our vise, clamp this thing down, and then begin our hammer and dolly work. But I want to talk a little bit about the metal itself first. So one of the things you have to remember is metal is malleable. That's a big word, like gymnasium. Metal moves, and there, for every action on metal, there is an opposite and equal reaction, which is basically a principle of life. So when we start bending, especially on a curve, what's going to start happening is this metal is going to want to start forming like this, or it's going to warp. So our hope is that by putting it in a die like this, it's going to hold that metal rigid so it can't bend, and we're going to accomplish both tipping the edge and shrinking that edge at the same time so that we don't end up with much warpage here. And one of the things I'm going to mention is there's all kinds of slag and stuff from cutting with the plasma cutter here. And we're going to need to take and clean that up so that these dies can squeeze together as close as possible when we put it over there in the vise that you're probably not seeing in the shot yet. And squeeze this together and then start doing our hammer and dolly work. The other thing we want to do is make sure that there's no bends in the metal. It's pretty flat, but that little corner must have got dropped, so we're just going to dolly that out. Hammer that out, I should say. Doesn't have to be perfect. Looks good. So now that we're going to be putting this into our forming dies, we're going to want to determine how big of an edge we want, and we're probably going to go with a typical, 1/2 to 3/4 inch lip. And that would be more determined by the project itself. And we want to make sure that our metal is following the curvature that we created in the beginning. Yeah, that's what I thought. I had that backwards. Okay, so we're going with a little over a 1/2 inch lip here. That should be pretty good. Looks pretty good. So it's pretty good now. The metal squeezes together nicely. So we're going to put this in our vise. The metal squeezes. The wood squeezes together nicely. We want to get that in as deep into the jaw as we can because this metal is going to have a tendency to want to go down. Clamp that down tight. And you can see why I'm recommending hardwood, because we're going to be beating on this and we're going to be doing other stuff. So I'm also going to probably put a couple more clamps on here just for a little extra added measure. Help give that die some support. Okay, these are not great clamps, they're Wally World Specials. Now we're going to get our sheet metal hammers and start our forming process here. You'll notice I added one more clamp here, again because this is pine, it could crack. I want as much support as possible. And I'm using my favorite hammer. You're not going to want to use a construction hammer or a ball peen hammer if you can help it. I can't recommend enough. Pick yourself up a cheap set of Harbor Freight. These are really old ones, but they're not Harbor Freight. But just pick yourself up a cheap set of hammer and dollies and use this. So we're going to go this way with it and just start tapping our metal over. You don't want to be in a hurry with this at all. Now I can move my clamp. Give me a little room to get over here. Can't emphasize, you don't just start wailing on it. You want to tap things gently. Remember that this metal is moving and shrinking as well as bending, so that the rest of the piece of metal underneath that wood be less likely to bend. We're probably going to have to do a little hammering and dolly work on it, but metal is like clay. It's malleable and it moves if you work it properly. So again, and you can see why I'm, hopefully you can see why I'm clamping this here in the middle, because especially with this pine and my jaws on my vise being not real deep, this little die that I made could crack, and that would obviously, we'd have to make another one, and that would be a pain. And even hardwood could do that. You see our wood now is starting to spread apart here where the clamp is. I'll just squeeze her back up a little bit. So we've definitely got a little bit of a wrinkle in here that we're going to have to try to deal with. And that would be a simple fix in the shrinker stretcher. And that would pull that. But again, we're trying to do this with simple tools. Excuse me. So let me get a dolly to put in here. Round edge dolly that we can kind of work that a little bit. What's going to happen though is this is going to start pulling this piece this way. So we've got to be very aware of that. Well, that didn't work. And I'm bleeding. Woohoo! There you go, Daddy. Bleeding. Okay, we're gonna do it this way. You just always got to be thinking ahead as to what you're trying to accomplish and how you can do it. you can see that's going and pulling that metal that way. Just putting it back in the vise. And you see how that does that? It starts pulling it like crazy. That's why we use that forming die. So I'm just pushing back on this as we're tapping that there. This can't put quite as much pressure on this as I would like. Good news is we've overextended it now, so that's good. We can start to bring it back, and that should help put it back in place. So I'm going to actually put it back in our die. Now my objective is to just drive it back down into the die as much as possible. And help straighten that edge back out. It's off a little bit right there, but we're getting there. Yeah, we created a little bit of a buckle in it. Not bad. Bring it down here. Remember what we've always said, put your hammer moving the direction you want to move the metal. We're definitely got a little bow in that piece, but we're getting there. It's not bad, not bad at all. Okay, it's pretty good. We've got a little buckle right in here. We can do a little better job of hammering and dollying the rough stuff out of that, and we will do that. But we've created a little bit of a whoop, which is you even do that with a bead roller. So we're going to trim that off so that that edge is exactly where it should be, and that'll give us a little more freedom because we'll have a little less material in here to allow that to shrink up better. So a little work with the purple wheel, and I did go over it with the big grinder one more time. I thought I had the camera on and I didn't, so I apologize. But just straighten up the edge a little bit more. It's pretty straight. It could use a little bit more work. It's got just a slightest little thing, and the thing about that is 10 seconds on the shrinker stretcher would pull that in. But again, we're trying to show you what you can do with hand tools. Worst case scenario, if you wanted to save time, you could pie slice that just a little bit, bend it in place and weld it up. But I'm just trying to show you the possibilities and the concepts. I'm not doing this on a project because I'm going to use the other tools, and the product turns out just a little bit better. But let me show you what we got. It's got a little divot in it right here that I would need to spend a little bit more hammer and dolly time on. But you can see it's pretty straight. It's got a few little hammer marks in it, but we didn't spend any time doing ultimate metal finishing on it. But if I didn't have the tools that I have, this would be more than good enough for what I'm doing. Emphasize enough, again, I'm not a fabricator, okay? I'm just a guy who's too stupid to know any better and just keeps tackling stuff like this. So there are artisans out there. There are guys like Trev's blog, Minifab, Iron Trap Garage, and others that I'm not thinking of right now, who are much, 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 much better than me at this. I'm self-taught. I've never really had any formal training in this. But again, just being too stupid to know it can't be done and doing it anyway. So if you think that's a respectable part, here's a way you can do it if you don't want to go out and spend a few $100s for a bead roller and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope you're enjoying this series on Fabrication That Doesn't Suck. As I think of other projects that maybe you could learn from, I'll do more. We just did one building the pipe anvil back here for bending sheet metal. Of course, we're doing this here with wood dies to form. We've done one on bead rolls. I think we've maybe done another one also. Simple tools, simple project. Fitzy Fabrication is another guy. He does almost all of his stuff with simple tools. He's a lot better at it than I am. And he might take a project on like this and do it in multiple pieces. I don't know how he might do something like this, but this is the way that I would do it if I didn't have the tools and equipment to do it with the bead roller and shrinker stretcher. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Would you do me a favor? Drop comments down there about what other fabrication techniques you'd like to see me tackle. I'm not promising I know how. I'm only showing you what I do know. Back in the day, before I had the tools, I'd have been very happy to put this piece in as a potential wheel opening piece to make a small patch or something like that. Anyway, thanks for being here. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Make sure you drop those comments down there. Hit that like button. Smash that subscribe button so you're sure to receive the updates for when new episodes come out. We put out episodes right now, at least Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Thinking about backing off a little bit for a while, but so far I'm still able to accomplish it, so we'll keep going. More coming on Stitches real soon, and more coming on the 47 Ford. We're on Facebook and Instagram /mycarshop. And one more thing, don't forget it. Rock!